facts, figures, and all the rest of it are rough. I've been doing my notes in the last 30 seconds and I haven't got a pre-prepared text. It was one of the ideas that we were suggesting to substitute for tomorrow morning, and instead, and I think it's the best idea, that we go for the formation of the CPGB, because then we can talk about, I think, what haunts the contemporary left, and that's the lack of a party. Anyway, I'll forgive anybody who wants to leave. I can understand why. This is what we advertised, and instead you're getting a very impromptu discussion. But I think it's an important and it's a very useful discussion nonetheless. Okay, I mean, let's just begin with Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to go on about Black Lives Matter, except to say here was a spontaneous movement. It was, most intense and most important in the United States, but it took on global proportions. And one of the things I think that must have struck at least British people looking at the press reports and the TV cameraman was one, the huge proliferation of, homemade placards. I think you can really tell, a spontaneous movement, under those circumstances of where people are making their own placards out of cardboard boxes in the main. And the other thing I think that would strike people is two slogans. And that is, first of all, defund the police, which makes a lot more sense in the United States, given its federal structure and much more localist police force, as opposed to the much more centralized police force that we have in Britain. And the other one, which really must have, hope gets some people thinking, at least in Britain, I don't know about on continental Europe, and that is, the slogan, abolish the police. Now, we in the CPGB have been known in various unity formations to raise the question of abolishing the standing army, and we include the police under that umbrella, and replacing the armed forces of the state with a popular militia. The response that we get in Britain from our comrades on the left, who are purportedly Marxist, is quite frankly dumb incomprehension, or the equivalent that we're advocating. The release of psychopathic murderers onto the streets of Britain with Kalashnikovs in order to mow down people. I think that there's been a huge forgetting in terms of the left and its tradition and its past programmatic pronouncements. I deliberately went out to read The Socialist. That's the weekly publication of the Socialist Party in England and Wales, and Socialist Worker, the paper of the Socialist Workers' Party in Britain, to see what their reaction to these slogans from Black Lives Matter was. And I was, on the one side, completely unsurprised that both organizations were tailing Black Lives Matter and the slogans. So they were basically saying, what, abolish the police, we too want to abolish the police. But then when you actually read the editorials and comment pieces, what you found is that this abolition was to come after the abolition of capitalism. So what they then explained is under a socialist society, of course, you wouldn't have a police force that's separate from the population. What you'd have is some sort of self-policing by the population. To me, that puts the cart before the horse. Why? Because you have to ask the question, okay, so if you're called to abolish the standing army and the armed might of the bourgeoisie comes after you've won, how do you expect to win and protect your victory? Even if we take it on the most banal level of left labourism, okay, so you get your parliamentary majority, and then you pass legislation under those circumstances to abolish the army and the police force. Meanwhile, the army has been sent against you and the police force has been sent against you, and you're under arrest. Okay, so in terms of that particular slogan, of course, it has its roots in the Second Amendment to the American Constitution. It also ought to be pointed out that the American radicals that fought for that amendment themselves had a European and also an English tradition. So you can read Magna Carta, you can read the Bill of Rights, Glorious Revolution, and all the rest of it about the right to bear arms. We have no illusions in who that was talking about. It was the gentlemen, the upper classes. Nevertheless, there's also a tradition that seems to have generalized that idea that goes back to Florence and was spread throughout Europe on the basis of the writings of Machiavelli, and not just his writings. He was actually an official in the Florentine Republic and actually established a militia in Florentine, as opposed to the normal situation in Italy of the day to actually hire mercenary armies. As I understand it, Florence did use a mercenary army, and it's often the case, mercenary armies prove to be, how should you put it, fickle, to put it mildly. They didn't go and do what they said. They were more concerned with preserving their own skin. So Machiavelli was responsible for recruiting a militia in Florence. I can't say that it proved particularly militarily effective, but the main point would be, in a number of Machiavelli's works, he advocates the popular militia, and we can trace the spread of that idea in terms of radical thinkers through England, over the Atlantic, and into America. But it shouldn't be forgotten either that for Marxists, by the time Marx and Engels got round to the sort of founding documents, I suppose, of Marxism, certainly when it comes to programs such as the Communist Manifesto and the demands of the Communist Party in Germany, which came out the following year, you find this idea of replacing the standing army with a popular militia, the armed people. So if we look at the classic programs of social democracy, the Second International, you'll find this idea in the Gotha program, you'll find it in the Erfurt program, you'll find it in the program of the French Workers' Party, the program that was written in Engels's front room in Primrose Hill in London. Interestingly, you'll also find it in the Labour Party's first manifesto in 1900. Clearly, the founders of the Labour Party were influenced, by continental Marxism. They weren't Marxist, but nonetheless, they were influenced by that. And I would guess, and I haven't gone and researched it, but I'd also guess that they were also influenced by the more general radical common sense of the 18th and 19th century. So again, looking at the British tradition, I think it's worthwhile recalling that the Chartist movement championed the idea of a popular militia. And certainly when we had Sir Robert Peel founding the modern police force, that's a professional police force, a centralized police force over London, and how that was rolled out over Britain, a very different police force to the one that had previously existed. The old police force was locally controlled, tended to be controlled inevitably by the squirearchy. Supposedly every adult male between whatever and whatever was meant to do their service in the local police force. If you were well off, you simply paid someone, and the people that you tended to pay were ne'er-do-wells, physically unfit, often drunks, and very ineffective in catching criminals or doing much else. And that mattered then because what we had, as I said before, is Chartism, the foundation of the first modern Workers' Party. But also what you had is the local authorities trying to control mass Chartist demonstrations, both in London, but also on a regional basis. Certainly, if we think back a few years to Peterloo in Manchester, we all know the story there, that you had a demonstration in favour of extending the suffrage. I think it was a demand for universal male suffrage, a hugely radical demand in 1819. I think I've got the date right. And of course, what the local authorities did is send in how should we put it? What are they called? The dragoons, locally recruited dragoons. This consisted of the squirearchy and people in their pay. And we all know the story of Peterloo, how they hacked people down. A whole number of people were killed, but hundreds of people were injured. And one of the things that recommended the police, the modern police, the peelers, to the capitalist class is that demonstrations, law and order was more easily controlled through the police baton bashing someone over the head than by dragoons and their sabres. Also, in terms of actually maintaining, controlling thievery, the modern police force, the peelers, were certainly more effective by those that were commonly called in Britain at the time, or in England at the time, the Charlies. This is, I think it was established, this other militia or this other police force was established, I presume, under the reign of Charles II. Anyway, what I want to do is just, how much time have we taken up already? So we're 11 minutes past. We'll see. I wouldn't aim to speak beyond half past, Kevin, if that's okay. So what I want to do now is turn to both the program and example of the Russian Revolution. Because certainly for Lenin and the Bolsheviks, I don't know enough about the Mensheviks on this one. The idea of arming the working class was something that existed in their very origins, and obviously that came to fruition in 1905, and the December Revolution most fiercely fought out in Moscow. Worthwhile adding just a little note on that this employed barricade fighting. but not barricade fighting of the sort that was seen in the French Revolution of 1789 or even 1871. I think you can find the military writings of Engels where he declares that those sort of tactics as being out of date, given cannons, and especially in Paris after 1871, they actually rebuild the city to make the use of cannons more effective. I'm also told, this is again very much an aside, so forgive me, I'm also told that Istanbul was redesigned to facilitate the use of tanks against the civilian population. Either way, what they did is they used barricade fighting, but instead of the left, the Bolsheviks and their anarchist allies lining up behind the barricades, they fought from the streets, they fought hit and run. But what we need to understand is, of course, they were up against Tsarist troops, and I don't think that they succeeded in breaking the discipline of those troops. Clearly, World War I created different conditions compared with the Japanese-Russian War. And what you saw there is the breakdown of military discipline towards the end of the rule of the Tsar. The Tsar collapses and military discipline, certainly in the two capital cities, is fatally undermined. I remember the discussion from a day or so ago, talking about the United Front and Lars's talk as well. And the situation there, that the Petrograd Soviet actually takes upon itself the constitutional authority, that it must be in a position to countersign all military orders. So in terms, if an offensive was going to be ordered, that had to be countersigned by the Soviets. If troops were going to be moved to the front, that had to be countersigned by the Soviet. Anyway, it wasn't only the army that underwent disintegration and fell out of the tight control of the state. Obviously, there's a difference between Petrograd and Moscow and the front, and a difference between that and regiments in the south. But it wasn't only the army that, how should you put it, fell out of control. Also, the police force disintegrated. We need to understand about the Tsarist police. They definitely were of the dragoon type, i.e. They weren't employing the methods of the British peelers. They were much more of the tradition of the old English dragoons, i.e. They would carry sabres and they would use sabres on demonstrators or shoot demonstrators. As a result of that, they were certainly hated with a passion. I'm not suggesting for a second that the peelers weren't hated. They were recognized by the Chartist movement, by the radical movement, as an instrument much less to control crime and preserve, the life and limb of the citizenry. They were seen much more as an instrument of counter-revolution against those demanding universal male suffrage. And I think if I'm right, there was a reasonably famous incident of where the police were sent in to disperse a very moderate reform meeting. A policeman was killed, and a jury actually found that was justified homicide. So hated were the police force. Anyway, my main point is that the police force in Moscow and crucially Petrograd disintegrates. And what we see is the formation of two alternate armed forces. And that is the ones that are seen as a replacement police force that is promoted by the Mensheviks and the right-wing socialist revolutionaries and the cadets. And then what you see is the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard sees its task to keep law and order in the locality, but as the name suggests, also to protect the revolution. And out of them and alongside them, we also see the emergence of the Red Guards. The Red Guards are marginal until after the Kornilov attempted coup. We all know the role of the Bolsheviks and basically how after that they go on to score victory after victory, both in Soviet elections, but also in local council and district elections. And what happens under those circumstances is that the Red Guards mushroom. And if you read Lenin's writings in the summer and autumn of 1917, he's quite clear. Of course, he welcomes this development. Many of these either Revolutionary Guards, certainly the what did I call them? The Revolutionary Guard and the Red Guard. Lots of them were under the influence of the Bolsheviks. Lots of them were passing Bolshevik-sponsored resolutions. But Lenin actually says, well, the thing about these workers' militia, these Red Guards, is they are a prelude to the general arming of the population. Something that he spoke about, of course, in State and Revolution, but also way back and consistently throughout the history of the Bolsheviks, going back, to 1903, into two tactics of social democracy and all the rest of it. So, in other words, he wasn't counterposing the Red Guards against a popular militia. He saw the Red Guards precisely as one of the means to actually win the rule of a workers' and peasants' government, all power to the Soviets, a Bolshevik government, in other words. Of course, the role of the army was also crucial. We all know that the Petrograd Soviet established a revolutionary committee against Kornilov, but also this was the committee under Trotsky, of course, that issued the orders to change the guard, not to send troops to the front, and to arrest the provisional government and storm the Winter Palace. I know it's an old story, but in case anyone hasn't heard it, I've told it too many bloody 100 times. I know, comrades, so apologies. But of course, famously, more people were killed in Eisenstein's reenactment of the storming of the Winter Palace. Anyone who hasn't seen the film October, go and see it. I think that was produced in 1918 to mark the 10th anniversary. I don't think it quite came out on time. I think it was 1928. Anyway, I could be wrong. The main point would be that if you look at the reenactment of it, it's heroic, it's dramatic. People are climbing up gates, guns are going off all over the place. I'm sure they were not real. Nonetheless, more people were killed in the reenactment of it than in the actual event itself. The actual event itself was a pretty low-key affair. And we're told that when Lenin came back from his Finnish exile and was taken around the newly liberated city of Petrograd, he said, well, you tell me there's been a revolution. I don't see any evidence of it. And Trotsky, I think, did describe it, at least in Petrograd, as much more having the character of changing the guard. In other words, we have the slogan, Chartist slogan, the physical force Chartist slogan of peacefully if we can, forcefully if we must. In Petrograd, they could do it peacefully, and they could do it peacefully because they had the Red Guard, because the police had been dispersed, because the regiments and the rank and file were electing their own officers, because the Soviets had the constitution, unwritten constitutional right, and they exercised it to countersign or issue their own orders to loyal troops to the revolution, loyal troops to the Soviets. Okay, so just to wrap up, I really just want to sort of think out loud of, and ask the question of why, at least in Britain, I'd be interested to hear from comrades in the United States and in mainland Europe, if it's the same for you. But as I said before in my opening, when we raise in our draft program and when we raise that in front of other organizations, the demand to abolish the standing army, abolish the police, to organize a popular militia, we get giggles or attempts basically to shut us down. It's viewed seriously as some sort of crazy obsession. What was viewed as the norm in the 19th century and the norm in the 18th century is now viewed as crazy. Well, my explanation is sort of twofold, I suppose. And that is, on the one side, the integration of the Labour Party into the state. In 1900, that was an open-ended question. So when the Labour Party affiliated to the Second International in 1908, Lenin certainly talked about the Labour Party being a step towards a real workers' party. Kautsky thought it sort of already was. Lenin definitely didn't agree with that, but thought nonetheless that life would teach and it would make the transition to genuine socialism, i.e. Marxism. But of course, with World War I, with the coalition government, with the first Labour government, I think what you get with the Labour Party is it sort of goes from being a bourgeois workers' party to a bourgeois workers' party. The bourgeois wing of it also becomes a state party. This becomes an alternative party of government. And indeed, in the 1920s, it emerges as the alternative party of government to the Conservative Party. Marx and Engels famously thought that with the emergence of the Labour Party, or a Labour Party, which they thought was inevitable in Britain, that what would happen is that the bourgeoisie would stick with the great Liberal Party. That was the traditional party of the bourgeoisie, and the Tory Party, the party of the landed aristocracy, that would die. Of course, the opposite happened. It was the great Liberal Party that died. It split. The trade unionists split off from supporting Liberal MPs and Liberal candidates, and the Labour Party ceased being a tail of the Liberal Party and constituted itself as an independent, not of the bourgeoisie, but independent of the Liberal Party. Anyway, my main point is that I can sort of understand, therefore, if you are a state bourgeois workers' party, how you would want to forget all about your earlier common sense of replacing the standing army. The Labour Party not only abandoned that common sense at home, it also made it its own common sense to take the empire, the British Empire, for granted, something that the Labour Party would defend, of course, with the usual stuff about educating the natives and being good for people and all the rest of it. But what about the radical left? What about official communism? Well, they certainly have the illusion. If you read the old program of official communism, the British Road to Socialism, which was authored jointly by Stalin, what you had there, I don't know whether you want to describe that as either cynically or naively. If it was written by Stalin, surely it has to be cynically. But you have this idea that you would have a communist Labour government. And under those circumstances, the idea was that so constitutional were the police, were the army, were MI5, so law-abiding were the secret services and the bourgeoisie, that you really wouldn't face any sort of slave owners' rebellion. And the idea would be that the army would do its job, protect the country abroad, and the police force would do its job locally. And there you are, no problem. But it's amazing, isn't it, that you find that basically the same perspective with Socialist Party in England and Wales, and before it, militant tendency. But you also find it with those from an SWP tradition. And also, it has to be said, those that view themselves still as loyal adherents of Trotsky's 1938 transitional program. And my explanation there is that what they take from the 1938 transitional program is not the passages where Trotsky raises up how the workers will arm themselves on picket lines and take on the police and move towards Soviets. What you get is a decay in that, and the dressing up of the most minimal economic demands and their revolutionization. That as long as you raise up any sort of demand and get any sort of a following, that this automatically somehow takes you to socialism. And you don't want to frighten people by being too advanced. So what you do, you reflect existing consciousness, and you don't scare people, about what your real aims are. I think that's the politics of desperation. I think that that's the politics of dishonesty. And I think that if we look back to the 19th century, when you had mass parties of social democracy, and in the early 20s, mass parties of the Third International, people can be inspired in their millions by the honest truth that these are our aspirations and these are our methods to achieve that end. Because in my view, the idea that you're going to get socialism in Britain or anywhere else guarded by the equivalent of the British Bobby or the British Tommy is illusory. Our job, yes, is to raise demands in the police for proper trade unionism, the same in the army, but our aim is to win over regiments to our side with a view to ending the standing army and going over to a militia system, which is pretty useless when it comes to foreign wars, pretty effective when it comes to defending the country. I'm not going to go on about Trotsky's Red Army and Lenin's idea of revolutionary war across Europe. That's outside the remit of this talk, and I've overrun by 1 minute, so humble apologies. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Okay, I've indicated in the chat column the usual format, which is that if you want to take part in the discussion, ask a question, make a comment, then you can either do that by clicking on the participants button and going on to raise hand, or you can put your name into the chat box, which again you'll find on your you'll find underneath your panel. So at the moment, I haven't got any comrades indicating to come in. I'd like to thank Jack for stepping in at the very last minute. and did an excellent job of raising some questions. Okay, well, I've just got Daniel Lazare, and Daniel is. Let's just get him here. Okay, Daniel, you can come in now.
Okay. Thanks very much for the talk. It raises a lot of very important questions about not only what the demand should be, but when to introduce them, and how exactly to lead the masses along or persuade them to pursue a revolutionary road. But one point I want to emphasize, Jack mentioned the Second Amendment here in the United States. The Second Amendment confers an individual right to bear arms. It's not a workers' militia. It's not even a colonial militia that existed in 1775 at the Battle of Concord and Lexington. It's an individual right. So we have people in the United States who are stockpiling all kinds of arms, AR-15s, Kalashnikovs, even heavier weaponry, believe it or not. And these people parade about with their personal arms, and occasionally they engage in in mass slaughters, massacres. They invade schoolhouses and mow down elementary school children. It's not a good thing, and it's clearly a reactionary expression in that it's an attempt to reach back to the 1776. Sorry, hold on. Just one second, I'm sorry. To reach back to the American Revolution, turn the clock back, somehow reawaken those bourgeois revolutionary impulses. And it's just miles apart from any concept of a workers' militia or a workers' Red Guard. I mean, in 1936, when the fascist rebellion broke out in Spain, workers seized military arsenals. But they didn't seize it in the name of individual ownership of those weapons. They seized it in the name of collective working class ownership of those weapons. So that's my only point. The Second Amendment, I think, expresses an entirely reactionary concept of weapon ownership, and it should not be confused with a modern socialist concept of a workers' militia. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Dan. The next speaker is Gus Autas. My apologies for the pronunciation.
Yeah, you butchered it. Yeah, Jack, you asked about the response of the left in mainland Europe to the questions of militia, right to bear arms, those kind of questions, and so I thought I'd respond. Yeah, I think a lot of it is very similar. A lot of what you see when the left is putting forward demands like revolution, like one solution, revolution. There's totally no content to it. And at one point you said the left forgets its history. I think, and there is a lot of history here, like the first legislation banning the right to bear arms in the Netherlands was in 1919. Well, you can imagine why. But I think they don't forget their history. I think they deliberately choose to forget the history. Whenever we have put forward the demand here, a lot of the response you get is the time just isn't right to put forward these kind of demands, or some giggling, or even just getting angry at us for even saying such violent things at all. So yeah, I think the response is very similar. You also said at one point that it could be that it has gone away on the left because of becoming a governmental party. I just grabbed this book from my bookshelf. It's basically a collection of the Dutch Social Democratic program starting in the 1890s to 1977, and I couldn't locate it that quickly, but I think that moment it got scrapped from the program and where right to bear arms and for militia got replaced was 1937, just before the war. Of course, 2 years after that, they would join a government, very shortly lived because of the war, of course. But there's probably a point there that had to do with it wanting to become a party of government, and the program changed it to the danger of war should be combated by having international rule of law, which is just terrible. You also talked about defund the police, abolish the police demand, which I think is a bit problematic, the demand in and of itself, because it doesn't answer any questions. It doesn't solve any questions. It doesn't tell us what to do as a workers' movement against the police brutality, but also just in and of itself, defending ourselves, preparing ourselves for taking power. Instead, it leaves a lot open, which I think will in practice just lead to, especially in America, like Pinkerton armies and private police, because the workers' movement didn't put forward any alternative. I'm also interested in the question of the difference between individual weapon ownership and collective ownership. It's a debate we have amongst ourselves. Of course, we aren't legalists, so just because it isn't allowed to bear arms doesn't mean we can't bear arms, like as a collective, as a workers' movement, as a union. But still, I think it's an interesting question how we would put forward the demand and avoid giving the power to the bourgeois state to decide what would be a collective or who would be able to bear arms, which is not a power I want to give the bourgeois state. That's it.
Dank u wel, Gus. The next speaker is Mike McNair.
Yeah, thanks, John, for stepping in at the absolute bleeding last minute to fill in. So I'm not going to disagree with you on these things, but I've got a number of little bits in it. The first is that there was a militia in this country. The issue about whether there should be a militia in this country and what the relationship of the militia to the standing army and so on and so forth was, it's actually in already in the Bill of Rights 1689, that the raising or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in time of peace, unless it be with consent of Parliament, is against law. And that's Article 6 and Article 7, that the subjects which are Protestants may have arms for their defence suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law. And background to that is that the regime of Charles II and then of James II had seized equipment from Whig noblemen, weapons along the scale of the equipment for a whole regiment of cavalry and a whole regiment of infantry and 3 or 4 pieces of artillery that Lord Delamere had in his capacious property. So it's about the right of the bourgeoisie to overthrow the pre-capitalist state. That's why that comes in, and I guess that the reality is that's actually why it appears in the Bill of Rights in the American Bill of Rights. Yeah, I agree that with Dan Lazare that the right in the American Bill of Rights is an individual right. The same is true of the right in the English Bill of Rights. It's an individual right because the English Bill of Rights is not an entrenched constitution, and Firearms Act 1920 passed because of a Bolshevik scare repeals pro tanto the English Bill of Rights. That said, as I said, there was a militia and it went on being a subject of debate that there should be a militia rather than a standing army or militia, as well as a standing army, serious general conscript militia training. And then on top of the conscript militia, which you had reactivated in the 1750s and went on through till the late 19th century, you had volunteer forces of the yeomanry, which were the guys who did the Peterloo massacre, the hunting classes, gentlemen on horseback with swords, etc. But in the late 19th century, volunteer forces were formed, again, in this case, not from the hunting classes, but from the upper middle classes in the towns. And I think it's a remote reflection. What happened to it essentially was that the militia proper became centralized under central government control and bureaucratic management. And then the bits of the militia were mobilized in 1914. So that the British, part of the British Army was militia based, but it was turned into regular forces. And then a new militia was created in the form of the Home Guard, but again on a volunteer basis in 1940. It says something, I guess. I was at school, at a private school in the late 1960s, well, in the 1960s through early 1970s. And unless you were conscientious objector, you were required to be a member of the school cadet force and do rifle training and training in military tactics. And to be honest, it seems to me that it's the this is paradoxically, it's the upper classes being given that right, reflecting the fact it's private schools. But it's actually what Engels proposed in his article, Can Europe Disarm? That the way to the militia is through universal military training in schools, not primarily through volunteer operations. Just on the police before the peelers, I put up the justifiable homicide. There's also actually a case in 1709 where the court ruled that where a policeman made an unlawful arrest, to kill the policeman was manslaughter and not murder, because it's provocation to violate constitutional rights by making an unlawful arrest. And that was still followed in the 1740s in relation to the press gang, but was abandoned in the press gang was the guys who conscripted sailors arbitrarily off the street for the Royal Navy. It was abandoned, I guess, because of the issues about the press gang in the 1760s. But I think it's reasonably clear that the peelers, the London street police force, was indeed, it was about public order, as John said. And the conscript constabulary, it's not actually true that people, it's true that the rich, relatively rich, it wasn't actually the upper classes who were conscripted into being constables, it was the middle classes, but the upper end of that hired a substitute. The fact was there was guys who were in regular practice of selling themselves out as substitutes. They were called, they were referred to as thief takers. There was a private, whole business of private detection and prosecution, which was also associated with people in conspiracy with the criminals to handle stuff like that. So that this stuff, it's not that it was, it's not that the control of ordinary theft and assault and battery and stuff like that, wounding, was being done by the new constabulary. They weren't bloody doing it. Actually, the point at which we move into it's being dominated police prosecution for this stuff is late 20th century. So that the idea that disbanding the police force would get rid of, would mean that there was no dealing with crime is a nonsense. It would just mean that you didn't have a public order force, and that you have to accustom yourself back again to normally private detection and private prosecution, and perhaps yes, through the workers' movement organising itself to deal with these questions. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Mike. There are a couple of reasonably long comments in the chat box, so I don't know if Jack would just like to sort of take account of them when I call him back in to reply, which will be in a couple of minutes or so. Since nobody's put down to talk, I'll just usurp my position to make a few remarks. One couple of which are historical primarily. For those of us who are sort of devotees of Sherlock Holmes and the late 19th, early 20th century crime fiction, the ready availability of firearms, and particularly Watson being called on with his trusty service revolver, gives a very different picture of the availability of weapons. And indeed, I remember reading some articles on crime in the late 19th century, which suggested that the murder rate, not simply as a murder rate, but actually the use of firearms was much more widespread than was to be considered the case until the mid-late 20th century, which would tend to suggest that weapons were more widely available. And indeed, there is, I think, a post-First World War assumption with the reference of the Firearms Act that talks about that the holding of weapons is a monopoly of force which can only be used by the state. But before then, the idea of force, I think, is more widely diffused. I was thinking in particular of the Irish question. The Ulster Volunteer Force, which was established as effectively a private army to resist Home Rule in 1912, drew upon much earlier traditions of banding and of groups of people coming together, and indeed would use the rationale going right back to 1688, the right to resist unlawful authority or illegitimate authority. That was part of that tradition. It also drew on another legal tradition of magistrates being able to authorize drilling. And of course, since many of the Unionists in northeastern Ireland were magistrates and members of the local elite. But I think a more interesting example going back into the 19th century are the Fenians, who also armed and organized, if not entirely openly, certainly not as in such a clandestine way as would be the case with the later Republicans. And of course, the Irish Citizen Army and the Irish Volunteers, which before the First World War are openly organizing and drilling. And again, one of the things that would, I think, run quite counter to some sort of perceived British tradition is to see armed bodies of people who are in support of a political cause. Just sort of one last point to this, and I think it's the point about the bourgeois state, and indeed a whole number of areas which we don't think of as being the role of either citizens of the state or of the working class movement. So that functions like law and order are considered in a sense not to be our province, whereas in earlier societies, keeping good order, the ideas of the watch and the posse and so on are all quite important. And I think that it's an example of where the state sort of acquires a monopoly of a function which in many societies are collectively considered So things like the watch systems in many towns and cities, and indeed some of the elements that emerge in various strikes, all draw upon this other tradition of our own collective activity, as opposed to allowing the state a monopoly on this. Okay, well, I see now that Peter Manson wants to come in, so I'll call Peter.
Yeah, I just want to be very brief, answering the points made by Dan Lazar in the States and Hus in the Netherlands. Well, Dan's quite right, of course, that in the States, it's the ones who are calling for, who are championing the right to bear arms. It's mainly the right, and they're doing it on the individual basis. We need our arms to protect ourselves, you know, and all the rest of it. But the right, yes, we demand it as an individual right, but also as a collective right. And that brings us to what Hus was saying when he said the you know, this abolish the police. It just doesn't quite seem to fit in. It's like in a void. But I mean, it goes hand in hand with the call, with the demand for a people's militia. So we need the collective right to bear arms. We need to be able to form a people's militia, and that's what it's about, isn't it? Replace the police with the people's militia. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Next call on Jim Cook. Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, and you come, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Last minute stuff, very good. You started off talking about defunding the police, you know, the core in the States. And of course, part of that is because of the massive amounts of money which is spent on the police. And it's been ramping up year after year after year as part of the whole ramping up of military expenditure. The Pentagon has got money pouring out of its ears. Every year it gets voted more money than it asks for, because the arms industry, of course, have carefully placed suppliers and weapons manufacturers in every congressional district, I think. And so jobs are at stake. But there was a thing I read online not long ago. There's this thing about the police attack black people because of their history as chasing slaves in the South and so on. And someone's pointing out that the police in the North were really founded to attack the working class. On the Haymarket riots is possibly the most famous, but the way that the Wobblies were slaughtered in the early 20th century is also part of it. And it's also this: if the working class needs to prepare for an armed confrontation, the ruling class, of course, have been doing this for a long, long time, partly through this overfunding, as it were, of the police. When SWAT teams were first brought into existence, they were supposed to deal with the most dangerous of the dangerous, with armed police kicking the door in or blowing it in and all the rest of it. And it's been pointed out they're used for virtually any minor drug charge. You know, somebody smelt something out the window, that sort of thing. And you've got all sorts of innocent people killed. Perhaps the most notorious is the baby wasn't killed, but the flash grenade that landed on its face in its cot not all that long ago. And they now have, I think it was in the Reagan years when this transfer of military equipment from the military to the police started, really, with armored cars, even tanks nowadays, as well as all the most high-powered rifles and so on, machine guns and so on. But you've also got a certain development in this country, of course. Even in the miners' strike, you didn't see the armour that they have nowadays just for walking around the cities. And I think in both cases, a large part of it was started with the alleged war on drugs. Eichmann, is it Eichmann? No, what's his name? Ehrlichman openly said years after the event that the war on drugs for Nixon was to get onto blacks and hippies, and to put people in jail from that point of view. And the war on drugs seems to have helped in the militarization of the police in the US and the UK. Of course, when push comes to shove, we can say really that it doesn't matter how well armed the police are. If they're going to come over, if they're going to split, going to come over or whatever, then that's going to be on the basis of what they have, whether it's a baton in the early part of the last century or a taser in the early part of this century. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Jack, do you want to sum up, or sorry, not sum up, make a response? Okay.
Yeah, I shouldn't be teaching Daniel Lazar about the US Constitution, Dan, but my reading says along the lines of a well-regulated militia. So yes, it's certainly been interpreted by individual loonies to buy all manner of different military hardware, but it says what it says. And I think it, this tradition, as well as being a conservative one, as Mike was explaining in terms of the Glorious Revolution and the struggle against the Stuarts, there's also a progressive side to it, and in that sense, if you take the right to, or the right, if you take resisting the state and its overarching power, this is something that the radical movement takes and the workers' movement takes. So in terms of specific slogans in the United States under this or that circumstances, I don't know. I think it would be perfectly legitimate to say disarm racist militias. Merely because it says it in the Constitution that they have the right, doesn't mean we have to agree. The question is, we are fighting for our right to resist and our right to overthrow a unpopular, illegitimate government of the ruling class. So that's how I would read that one. So I don't think in terms of what the US Constitution says, it's miles apart from what we would say, for example, in our draft program, where we have the question of a militia. It's certainly true that if we take the history of the US, there's plenty of instances of right-wing militia, but there's also, for example, with all their faults, the Black Panthers parading on the basis that this is our constitutional right. In terms of what Gus was saying, I mean, we are not raising in Britain, and I wouldn't advise anyone in the Netherlands to raise the slogans that I saw on my TV or in my newspapers in terms of these US placards. All right, so I'm not suggesting tailing the Black Lives Movement. What I'm saying is that the opportunist left in Britain did, and I was intrigued of how they would square the circle, because every time we raise the slogan of a workers' militia from our tradition, they dismiss it. And then you look over at the United States and you have thousands upon thousands of people marching, many of which are carrying slogans either to defund the police or actually to abolish the police. So I'm not wanting, in terms of the CPGB, to raise the slogan, abolish the police, because precisely as you say, we already have a program, and we have a program of what we want to replace the police by, what we want to replace the standing army by. But it is about now, it's about our immediate program. It's not just about under socialism. It's one of the methods we would envisage of getting to socialism. And I would certainly argue that while a popular militia that we could raise before the revolution, in military terms, you know, in serious military terms, is an unserious body, right? Of course, it cannot destroy, you know, it cannot knock down fighter aircraft or you know, squadrons of drones, or take out Queen Elizabeth II, the new aircraft carrier, Britain's new aircraft carrier, or take on tanks. I mean, we can throw Molotov cocktails, we could blow up a tank or two, no doubt. But in terms of a direct confrontation between our militia, however much we imagine it, and the modern army, we don't stand a chance. We know that. But precisely the question is to show people in the army that we're serious, right? And fight to split the army, right? To neutralize and split the army. And I don't think you're going to split the army. You can split the army under certain circumstances with no arms. I readily accept that. But if you don't equip the mind beforehand, I don't think you really have a chance. That's really my argument. And I did raise the Chartist slogan, which I know has been used against you lot, which is bizarre. In the Socialist Party in the Netherlands, the party officials go around talking about you comrades being violent, and they've raised the slogan, peacefully if we can, violently if we must. And they forget that that's the slogan of the physical force wing of the Chartists. It's something you'll find every week in the Weekly Worker. We don't want violence. We know that in a violent situation, it's our side that would suffer. We don't want a civil war, right? We want peace. So it's peacefully if we can. We don't want loads of working class people dying. We don't want their families dying. We know that if you're rich, you can jet out of the situation. Our class finds that much more difficult to find refuge abroad. Anyway, so peacefully if we can, violently if we must, is definitely our slogan. So I'm not proposing to tail Black Lives Matter. I'm just using that as an opportunity to hopefully begin a discussion on the left that you lot want to tail it. We don't. But it's raising slogans for the now, as far as I can see. They're not talking about after the end of capitalism, abolish the police. They're raising it now. And so what's the response of the left? What's the answer of the left? Do you just say, this is a utopian demand? In my view, you know, worthwhile just saying, in my view, if you take a class society, the police predominantly will be used against the lower classes. In general, it will be the bottom end of the working class that street cops come across. And in Britain, because of mass migration, that will include a lot of people whose families originated either in Africa or the West Indies. And therefore, on a street level, racism is spontaneously produced. And I think the same is true in the United States. You can put the police through all manner of racism awareness courses and using the right language in the canteen, on the street. When it comes to thumping people, when it comes to chasing people, they will still racially profile people. And that's why I can understand if I'm middle class and black and driving a nice car and I'm an MP and I'm stopped by the police, I get infuriated. But that's because black people disproportionately occupy the bottom end of the working class in Britain, and that's why the police do it. And it's not a question that they are just racist as individuals, it's the nature of the institution. Anyway, okay. Just in terms of the questions that Jim Cook raised up, just to stress the point that what is the actual role of the police? Well, I think the role of the police historically in Britain, and you can look at the original foundation of the Peelers, is law and order on a street level. If you look at the British police with all their computers, with all their DNA, with all the spy cameras that we've got, as I understand it, the last set of figures that I came across for clear-up rates of reported crime, most of us don't bother reporting crime, right? It's 6%. So in spite of all this money that they spend, in spite of all this surveillance that they have, in spite of all this technology they have, they clear up 6% of reported crimes. And the idea that we couldn't do without this force, I don't buy into. A population that learns to, in inverted commas, police itself is going to be in a far stronger position as a class that is determined to go to the future, that looks after all, to produce on the basis of need. That class has got a very good chance of overcoming an awful lot of antisocial behavior. I'll just give you an anecdote. I was listening to a Trotskyist comrade from, what do they call it? Lutevier, good few years ago, admittedly, and he was getting on, and he was saying, look, if you take the red belt of Paris, this is the working class area in the outskirts of Paris. They all used to vote communist. So it's a good few years back. But he was describing the situation that every block of flats, every, very small unit of working class life had its Communist Party cell, had its Communist Party secretary. They knew who was doing the graffiti. They knew who was doing, street robberies. They knew who was breaking into the next door neighbor, and they would have a quiet word. And I don't mean beat the shit out of them, right? That is far more effective, actually, in real terms, than it is ringing, what do we have, 101, is it? Let alone 999. That's, I don't know what it is in America, but ringing the police and getting the police round. Chances are the police won't turn up. And if they do turn up, it will be 5 days after, and they give you a crime thing for insurance, right? Anyway, I don't think that the police are effective in the purported job that they do. I'm not proposing, by the way, that we hand over, every murder investigation, to the People's Militia. You can have a specialist branch in the People's Militia that deals with that question. I'm talking about street level. I'm talking about neighborhood level. I'm talking about blocks of flats and all the rest of it. Yes, just lastly on that question. Again, it's interesting. I think, Dan, you raised it. And that is, why did the army, and I think it was a very significant moment, why did leading figures in the army turn around to Trump and say no? Well, Dan put his finger on it straight away, and we did the same in our discussions in London. And that is, if you look at the army in America, as opposed to the police force, where the police force doesn't actually map sociologically, racially, those who they police. In the army, you have a disproportionate number of black men, hugely disproportionate number, by the way, of black women in the army. And precisely given the experience of Vietnam, I think that what the generals and the others in the US Army feared is, will they actually shoot these Black Lives Matter protesters if they're ordered to do so? And they must have said, well, if they don't, what do we do with them? Do we shoot them? Do we march them off? What then happens to our US Army? A final anecdote, this is my own personal anecdote. My grandfather was a sailor pre-World War I, and I don't know when it would be, but maybe 1910, 1911, 1912, 1913. I don't know the date because he's dead now and I can't go and ask him. But not only did they use the army against strikers in Britain, march them down the streets and all the rest of it, and actually have duff-ups with strikers. In South Wales, it might have been Winston Churchill, I don't know, but he told me when I was a very young lad that they marched them from their base. I don't know what it was called, what a naval base is called, but they marched them to confront miners in South Wales with guns, with rifles. And the sailors, who tend to come from a working class background, a skilled working class background, refused. And rather than discipline these people, the captain or whoever it was just marched them off. And so in terms of the traditional armed forces, using them against the civilian population is considered very risky. And it's risky because these guys sign up maybe out of economic desperation. Sometimes they're conscripted, but they don't go and join the army in order to shoot down their neighbors. They don't join up in order to shoot down their own. So precisely this then highlights, I think, again, the importance of a workers' militia, in terms of educating our class and in the attempt to split the army. And just again, I know I'm repeating myself, but yeah, the modern peelers, the Metropolitan Police, that definitely was established again in the context of the Chartist movement, of the radicalization of the working class. They were viewed as a reliable counter-revolutionary force. It wasn't about thief catching.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Next speaker is Dan Lazare.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yes, sorry about that, Dan. Just go ahead.
No problem. Anyway, just to respond to some of Jack's points. Yeah, I mean, there's a long history of militias in the United States. In fact, the United States began because in the towns of, I think it was Concord, Massachusetts, now a suburb of Boston, the colonialists had accumulated a large store of communal weapons, and a British military detachment was sent out to seize that arsenal, that communal arsenal, and the colonists then lined up, and a battle ensued. That was the shot heard around the world, and the Revolutionary War was on. So in a sense, America began with the idea of communal gun ownership, and over the years, guns are everywhere. In America, the big problem is social anarchy. And governmental disorganization. So everybody's got guns, and everybody's forming communal militias. The slave owners had their slave catching societies where they patrol the countryside for runaway slaves, and they either return them to their owners or hang them on the spot. And the great tragedy of the Reconstruction period is that the Republican government in Washington never armed the freedmen. History would have been a lot different if they had had a militia composed of ex-slaves and poor whites who were pro-unionist to combat the ravages of the Klan, which was just taking shape in the late 1860s. So yes, and you know, and in 1900, the Pinkertons, a private detective service, had more people under arms, believe it or not, than the entire U.S. Army. So guns are everywhere. Private militias are everywhere. But I think in an advanced society today, most Americans and certainly all progressives are repulsed by the concept of private gun ownership. And I think that if there was any kind of movement for progressive democratic reform and constitutional reform, the movement would take aim at the Second Amendment first and foremost, because the great majority of Americans just despise it and think it's insane, which it is. But I also want to emphasize that, yes, I mean, a certain moment will come for the workers to arm themselves and for Red Guards to be formed and a workers' militia. But where our strength lies is in the concept of we are many, they are few. It's in the overwhelming numbers of the working class, not in the fact that they have arms or not, but simply their numbers, their control of industry, the fact that they comprise the rank and file of the military, and that, you know, when the revolutionary moment comes, the workers will use their strength, you know, in that respect. Their control of industry, there'll be mass mutinies as there were in revolutionary Russia, and the idea of the workers taking to the streets, you know, with a few private handguns and, you know, and taking pot shots at the 82nd Airborne with their overwhelming firepower. It's just it just doesn't make any sense, obviously. So I think that that it's really, I don't want to use the word peaceful, but it's in the overwhelming numbers and democratic weight of the working class that the revolutionary movement's real strength lies, and the ownership of guns, the even communal ownership of guns, is really a secondary question which arises at as the revolutionary movement is nearing its crescendo. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. Are there any other comrades who would like to come in? There's a number of comrades type quite a lot in the chat columns, but they could really make those points, I'm sure, verbally, or contribute. At the moment, I've got nobody who would like to come in. So can I take some take some further speakers, please? One comrade did type in something I think quite interesting, and does have some technical problems, but was referring to the experience in the British miners' strike, and particularly in other strikes where various forms of worker defence organisation, and indeed, I suppose, forms of organisation that went beyond defence. In particular, the use of protection of pickets, and indeed of various groups who were trying to make sure that the strike remained solid. And the comrade who made these notes just makes the point that most of the existing left groupings in the 1980s were either talking purely about forms of, quote, mass politics and objecting to this, but weren't in fact seriously taking up the issue of workers' defence. Yeah, it's the comrade doing that was Mark Lewis, and I think was referring to his own particular experience during that period. He's not able to contribute, he says, because his audio is out of action. Another comrade, again, some really quite long contributions here, and I can really just summarize some of them. But one of the key points, I think, is about the idea of mass struggle, and indeed particularly the idea of splitting the armed forces. And some of the classic accounts of that, of course, come from the Russian Revolution and Leon Trotsky's accounts of the events in February 1917. And in particular, I think not only the political preparation by the Bolsheviks and others, but by the nature of that, that political moment during the First World War, so that our demands were really, in terms of a revolutionary situation, will really flow from that type of situation. Anyway, are there any further comrades that would like to make a contribution? I know that the session was a rather impromptu one. Jack's done a very good job in drawing that together, but I wondered if any other comrades wanted to come in, perhaps before I pass it back to Jack, and we can perhaps maybe wrap up if nobody wants to continue with the discussion. So use the blue hand. Oh, I see Mike would like to come in. Okay, Mike, can you come?
On mute. So there's two things, one of which is sort of in support of Mark's point, and in illustration actually of way back when in the 70s, I was involved in a campaign to unionize the hotel and catering hotels in Oxford, and there's a big hotel in Oxford called the Randolph Hotel, which is a place where the upper classes go, and so on and so forth. And the picket line, which was TNGW picket line, was attacked by the armed gang organised by the Dowager Lady Birdwood, which was a microscopic neo-fascist organisation. And the problem, in essence, was that Alan Thornett and co., who were running the campaign, were unwilling to think about organising stewarding as a technical task. And the consequence of their unwillingness to think about organising stewarding as a technical task was that there was disorganised Barney. And the cops hauled off a whole load of people who wouldn't have needed to have been arrested, who could have been avoided. The arrests could have been avoided if we'd had a coordinated response, and all we needed was there to be a chief steward who was in charge of deciding whether to fight or retreat in good order. We didn't need guns or anything like that, but we did need thinking a little bit about the technical aspects. Conversely, again, same period, probably not particularly useful politically, but we, Oxford Trades Council and the Anti-Fascist Committee, which it was affiliated to, stopped John Tyndall holding a public meeting in Oxford Town Hall by turning out basically a hard core of car workers to block the entrance to the town hall. But that was actually, people thought about how to conduct, and that as a low grade. It's not a military operation proper, but it's a sort of, there's a sense in which it poses those decision-making, organizing issues. Secondly, in relation to the issue of militia versus why militia and arming the armed people and universal military training, it's not so much that we're, by proposing this, we're showing the squaddies that we're serious. We aren't. If we're going to win over squaddies, it's going to be over by a process of loss of political legitimacy of the constitutional order. But it is the case that in order to get at the loss of legitimacy of the constitutional order, we need to be able to say, this is how we think that this stuff could be done. And certainly in relation to policing, it seems to me reasonably clear that, as John said, the professional police force is about keeping control of the streets for the capitalist class. It is absolutely lousy at dealing with low-level crime. And indeed, with the introduction of paid public prosecutors and the reduction of the right of private prosecution, we've actually really substantially worsened the ability to deal with low-level crime. So that these issues about militia and about universal training in keeping order, and for that matter, trial by jury and so on, connected issues. These are actually issues which we have to put forward in order to have a clear and coherent alternative conception to the conception of the capitalist state. That's it.
Thanks, Mike. Laurie Combs next, please. Laurie Combs.
He was here a minute ago, but I think he's disappeared.
Okay, I can't see him. Okay, let me just. Okay, I'll just call now then Sashim, please, for a few minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Sashim. Yeah, come in.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to pose some wider questions, and part of it is a reply to some of the things that Comrade Lazar has said, like just basic strength in numbers on the street is not good enough as well. Like, I'm fully behind having popular militia, and as a way to defend ourselves, but also the wider workers movement in general. And a few things come to mind here. For example, in Germany, just pre-Hitler taking power and stuff like that, and we find that where there has been very, very strong workers' movements in the world, and where the rule of the capitalist class is challenged, the ruling class will more invariably choose to continue its rule through other means. And one of the things there was, like the rise of fascism. And I've worked in the States, I've worked in Minnesota, I've even helped run a rifle range up there for kids that are like 11 years old to like 15 years old. And I can actually see completely how the whole thing of training can be done in a very, very disciplined way. Even though when I went to school, I wasn't trained in that way. If they pointed the guns in the wrong direction, or even attempted to take a cartridge off sight that was not, that had been used, we came down on them very heavily. And then in relation to that, and kids in general, I remember a few years ago in Europe, there was an instance somewhere in Scandinavia. I think it was some social democratic party type outing, like camping, and the sort of person that you correctly characterize some people as absolute nut jobs with access to weapons, and this what could have been self-enclosed camp where you could have had people regularly on duty at checkpoints watching over everybody. This person managed to get into the place, and it's all good and well sometimes saying, okay, nobody should have weapons, but then sometimes when things like that are going to occur, the best way to defend yourself is not just at the last minute giving somebody a gun, somebody that's fired all sorts of weaponry, including AK-47s and stuff. Like these things, you actually need training in them. You need to actually know what to do with them, and you need to be organized. You need to be able to be organized in a way that's sufficiently able to actually lead to your defense. And I think I was mentioning to Jack the other day during an informal session, I see in the States there is there's the madness perhaps of the NRA, and we saw what happened in Charlottesville and things like that. But then on the other side of things, there are some nice green shoots, like especially in the form of an aspiring socialist rifle association. And some of them have talked widely about, well, are we going to leave the monopoly of armed force to the states? Are we really going to leave the monopoly of armed force to these nasty right-wing organizations? I don't know what some of them are called, the 3%ers and stuff like that. But so there's certain things that I've posed there that are on the approach of workers' control and a necessity for defense, but the necessity of general defense. And I understand part of your arguments about certain individual rights being there in the Second Amendment, but also the other way with what John was saying, where it was explicit, well resourced or whatever militia in order to defend the realm. And I understand in the States, for example, one of the first places that kind of broke down in my mind anyway was around trade, and then needing to run a professional navy.
Actually, if you could just come to a close now, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'll stop.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Laurie Coombs, I think you've come back now, Laurie. Laurie Coombs, the next speaker. Laurie Coombs, I can see Laurie. Can someone get him connected, please? Laurie Coombs, I can see Laurie.
Yeah.
Someone get him connected.
Can you hear me?
Please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Come in now, Laurie.
Sorry, it's just sort of technical stuff. This is the first time I've spoken on this format, so I've just got a couple of very brief points. When I first came across the CPGB, I must admit, I can see Laurie. Yeah. Someone get him. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can, yes. Right. Yeah. All right. Come in now, Laurie. Sorry, it's just sort of technical stuff. This is the first time I've spoken on this format, so I just got a couple of very brief points. When I first came across the CPGB, I must admit, I can see Laurie. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can, yes. Right. Yeah. All right. I'm just sorry, it's just sort of technical stuff. Format, so I just.
I'm sorry, we do seem to have some problems with a bit of feedback there. I wonder if the other host can just check it out. Laurie's currently muted, but we're trying to get him on. So can comrades unmute him?
I don't think we're going to succeed there, Kevin.
Okay, fine. Okay, I can see now. Yeah, it looks like we've got that. Okay, well, we are getting sort of close towards the end. Are there any other comrades who would like to come in for one last crack before I ask Jack to sum up? Okay, Jack, if you'd like to sum up, I mean, we've had to organise this session at last minute, so I think the fact that it's going ahead is a triumph, but it seems to have been dogged with technical problems as well.
No,
Anyway,
I'm sure
off you go.
I have to compliment comrades in the background. Yeah, and we are experiencing this or that technical problem, which I think is inevitable with this technology, and also our learning curve here. But it's been a great school so far. It's fantastic speaking to comrades from around the world. Yes, and on this subject then, so thanks, Mark. I thought you were getting a new microphone for your birthday, so get that in quick. On that, yes, one of our first experiences with the Leninist was the miners' strike. I think we'd just gone monthly, and I can remember sending Mark and was it Jim Moody, I think might have been, to Notts, where the strike was weak. And from my memory, you also went down to South Wales when they seized the NUM headquarters, distributing our paper and all the rest of it. The long and the short of it is, though, that what happened in the miners' strike is that miners, in particular, miners who had a military background, were forming hit squads. And this was directed against scabs, who obviously were a huge problem in Nottingham, but were a problem in other counties as well. From our point of view, we wanted the workers' movement to organize these hit squads. They tended to take the form of guerrilla attacks. And what you almost saw is a mirror image of guys that had gone over to Northern Ireland as military, come back home, get a job as miners, and they saw the same tactics that the army was developing to be used against the nationalist population in Northern Ireland being used against the civilian population, i.e. miners and miners' wives and their supporters in Britain. And they almost adopted, not the tactics of the IRA, obviously with bombs, but nonetheless, they resorted to military discipline and to military attacks, both on police equipment, but also on scabs. Now, the example that we came to them with was 1926. And Mark, you will know the incident in particular that I'm referring to. And this is from Scotland, of where the miners there were faced by police violence. And they organized a 400 strong hit squad. And there are pictures of it led by a guy on a white horse with a military metal helmet. He was actually a member of the SDF. What the hell, how that was still going, I don't know. This is Methyl Fife. Either way, he had 400 people behind him marching in military formation. And the reports say that having had the police attack them, first of all, as soon as they march with 400 strong workers' militia, the police laid off. And instead it went from police violence against them to the sort of let's have a game of football type situation. So there are examples in recent British history. There are more older examples. The point I'm making really is that militant class struggles generate this necessity. This is what I'm not against Trotsky. I'm for many of the things that Trotsky says, and it's certainly one of the things that I draw out from his transitional program, that militant strikes produce the need for a militia, and all we're doing in that sense is preempting it, saying these are the lessons of history. If we can have a situation of where we have a peaceful revolution, excellent, but we need to arm minds that we might not win that way. So I think that that's our role. Our role is to act in that sense as the memory of the class, the memory of the struggle for democracy, that it was never given to us. It's always something that we've had to fight for. Also, in terms of our own history, I mean, I emphasize that if you take the revolution, at least in Petrograd, it was amazingly peaceful. And it was amazingly peaceful because of the Red Guards, and also because of the regiments in the army that had aligned themselves with the Revolutionary Military Committee. Now, Dan is quite right that the main question for us is the fact that we have a majority, and a clear majority. And I think that was obviously the case in Petrograd. It was obviously the case in Moscow and other big cities. Nevertheless, in Moscow, I think 400 people died making the revolution. But it's the other side that doesn't recognize our majority. It's the other side that resorts to armed struggle. And in that sense, while I would not condemn comrades in America, Sachin, I can't remember their name, but the US Socialist Rifle Club or whatever, I think that within that, there is the danger of being a tiny sect and therefore evolving in the direction of terrorism and substituting for the mass support that they don't have with, well, we're going to take up arms against the Ku Klux Klan and the fascists. I think that that's the wrong way of going about it. Defending yourself, that's absolutely vital on the lines that Mike McNair said. You know, defend a picket line, defend your meetings against people invading, either using boots or clubs or guns. If that's what you have to do to defend your right to meet, to organize, that's what you should do. But there is a tendency on the left to no platform, not from the point of view of having the overwhelming majority on your side, but substituting for that majority. So yes, of course we need a majority. We need to fight for a majority, but we also need to programmatically arm that majority. In terms of what Mike was saying in terms of the squaddies, I'm not, I don't know what the average, soldier in Petrograd thought. As I understand it, what you had is a division between regiments or sections that tended to come from a more urban working class background. They were more reliable when it came to making the revolution, defending the revolution in the early period. Either way, the fact that the Revolutionary Military Committee, the fact that the Bolsheviks did have the Red Guards, did have some regiments under tight discipline, I think helped convince the soldiers who came from a more rural background, who might have been more interested in getting drunk than making the revolution, if you see the point. All I'm saying, though, is that you had to, as well as make propaganda, you had to show by deed that you were serious. I think that did play a role. That's all I would argue. Again, just talking about our experience, this is something sort of that Mark would back me up with if he had a mic. Talking to comrades from the army who participated in hit squads, what was noticeable with them is, one, their experiences in Northern Ireland, particularly from women. I'm not talking about young women, I'm talking about old women, just humiliating them. What the fuck are you doing, you know, son? But also what did affect their minds is the seriousness of the IRA, the willingness of the IRA to die for their cause. That did have an impact, at least on the people that we spoke to, who were ex-army, who were you know, leading militants in the struggle. Just a couple of other things, that in terms of what we're doing now in the CPGB, we are not raising the arms question as a point of agitation today. We're not saying go and organize your rifle club. We're not saying, or, you know, arm your picket line. No, we're not doing that. What we're saying is this is propaganda, and it's primarily directed at the left, because here's our tradition that includes the Labour Party that began with that idea of disarming, disbanding the standing army, having a popular militia, part of our tradition, as I said, that was embraced, as far as I can tell, by every party of the Second International, of course by the Third, that's now been totally forgotten or simply reduced to a task that after the revolution, it will sort things out. And just finally, okay, in Russia, of course, what you had, we, you know, had sort of a bleak reference to it today. You had pogroms directed by the Black Hundreds against Jews and against Reds, but against Jews. And the Bolsheviks saw it amongst their task to defend those Jews. And I would say that in the United States, this question is therefore raised with these fascistic armed bands. Are you going to rely on the racist police to defend people, or are you talking about self-defense? And if you're talking about self-defense, surely amongst the tasks of socialists is defending those people. So that would be something, again, depending on the concrete circumstances, I would raise as a question of agitation. That if the police in Britain, if right-wing mobs were attacking migrants, for example, what do you do? Do you rely on the police to defend them? Or does the workers go in there with large numbers, but prepared to defend them physically? I would suggest the latter. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thanks, Jack, and thanks for all the comrades that contributed, both on the chat box and also in person. Obviously, it was all done in a rather impromptu way, but I think it worked out reasonably well in the end. I'd just like to remind you about the sessions tomorrow. We've got another session tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, which will unfortunately, or fortunately, be Jack Conrad speaking on the history of the Communist Party of Great Britain, particularly its formation. And I suppose that will be quite an important question in terms of building a party and the importance of a party and a programme for contemporary socialists. And then in the afternoon, we've got Marcel van der Linden from Amsterdam speaking on workers and revolution. And again, Marcel is a very good speaker, plenty of publications and indeed research and practical experience in the global history of the labour movement. So those are two sessions that are well worth coming along to tomorrow. So we will take a break now, and I hope to see some of you tomorrow morning. So thank you, comrades, for contributing. More importantly, thank you for those who stayed on and stayed right through to the end, which was, of course, as the phrase goes, the overwhelming majority. So thank you, comrades.
Thank you.